Before anyone called him a kingpin, he was already being watched. Not because he was loud, but because something didn't make sense. The product was too consistent, the pricing didn't match the street, and the flow was too clean. That's what gets attention, not noise. Precision. Frank didn't build this out of nowhere. He learned under Bumpy Johnson watching how power actually moved in Harlem. Not the loud version, the controlled version. Who sat back, who gave orders, who never had to explain themselves. That's where Lucas started to shift. He stopped thinking like a worker and started thinking like someone who could build his own system. After Bumpy was gone, the structure didn't disappear, it weakened. Gaps opened. People rushed in, trying to grab pieces of what used to be controlled. That's where Frank Lucas saw the opportunity, not to fight for position, but to rebuild something cleaner, something that didn't rely on the same old layers everyone else depended on. Instead of stepping into the same system, Lucas stepped around it. While others stayed local, dealing with the same suppliers and the same risks, Frank started looking outward. Different routes, different access. Because if you rely on the same pipeline as everyone else, you're never really in control of anything. If you pay attention to how systems are built, not just how people actually see exactly where this is going. This isn't about hype, it's about structure. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with it, because the way Frank built this is the same reason it eventually broke. Frank Lucas didn't rush to take over, he stepped back and studied the gap. After Bumpy, the old order lost discipline. Too many hands, too many voices, too many people trying to prove something. Frank saw the weakness right away. The system wasn't breaking from pressure, it was breaking from inside. So Frank didn't try to fix the old model, he rejected it. No more relying on layers of middlemen who talked too much and took too much. Lucas wanted direct control. Fewer links in the chain, fewer chances for something to go wrong. Because every extra step between source and street is another place the system can break. He also changed who he trusted. Not random recruits, not people chasing quick money. Frank leaned on people he already knew. Family, close connections, controlled relationships. Because strangers bring risk, and risk spreads fast. The tighter the circle, the harder it is for pressure to get inside. Lucas also understood something most people ignored: supply decides everything. Not reputation, not territory, not who looks the toughest. If you don't control where it comes from, you're always reacting. So Frank stopped thinking like a distributor and started thinking like a source. That shift is what separated him from everyone still stuck fighting over street-level control. Once Frank locked the source, everything else became easier to control. Pricing stayed consistent. Supply stayed steady. No waiting on someone else to decide when product moved. That's the advantage most people never get. Lucas wasn't reacting to the market anymore, he was shaping it. And once that happens, the system starts working for you. Expansion was controlled, not rushed. Every new move had to fit the structure, same discipline, same expectations, same limits. Lucas kept it tight on purpose, even as the money increased, so the system wouldn't expose itself. Predictability, when managed right, makes the system harder to detect and easier to maintain. Frank also managed perception, not just what people saw, but what they thought they understood. He didn't need to look like the center of anything. That distance mattered, because the more directly you're tied to the operation, the easier it is to trace. Lucas let the system carry the weight, while he stayed just outside the frame. By the time the structure was fully in place, Frank Lucas wasn't chasing opportunities anymore, the system was producing them. Supply, distribution, money flow, all aligned. And when everything lines up like that, power doesn't need to announce itself. It just operates, quiet, controlled, and already ahead of anyone trying to figure it out. Frank's system wasn't just about access, it was about discipline at every level. Product came in the same way, moved through the same hands, and reached the same endpoints without deviation. No improvising, no shortcuts. Because the moment people start adjusting the system on the fly, it stops being a system. It turns into risk. Frank Lucas also controlled quality, not just quantity. What moved through his system stayed consistent. And that built something most operations never achieved: trust in the product itself. Customers didn't guess, and distributors didn't question. That kind of consistency removes friction. And when friction disappears, the system moves faster and cleaner without drawing attention. Frank also removed unnecessary movement. No wandering routes, no last-minute changes, no extra stops. The cleaner the path, the fewer chances something goes wrong. Lucas kept everything structured, same flow, same timing, same expectations. Because every extra move creates exposure, and exposure is what eventually brings pressure. He kept communication tight. No long conversations, no unnecessary details, no repeating information. Everyone only knew what they needed to know, nothing more. That separation mattered, because once information spreads too far, control disappears with it. Frank made sure the system stayed compartmentalized so one problem couldn't take down everything at once. Money moved just like everything else, controlled and accounted for. No loose handling, no public displays tied back to the operation, because sloppy money creates patterns, and patterns get followed. Frank kept the flow clean on purpose. The less attention the money attracted, the longer the system could keep running without pressure closing in. Frank also controlled behavior. No freelancing, no personal moves that tied back to the operation. Everyone stayed within their role. And stepping outside that role created risk for everyone. Because the fastest way to expose the system isn't pressure from the outside. It's someone inside making the wrong decision at the wrong time. Frank Lucas avoided one thing most people couldn't: visibility. No need to be seen, no need to prove anything publicly. While others used flash to signal power, Lucas kept distance from it. Because attention doesn't just bring respect, it brings questions. And once people start asking the right questions, the system starts getting closer to being exposed. But the system had one built-in weakness scale. The bigger it got, the harder it became to keep everything perfectly controlled. More movement, more money, more chances for something small to slip. And in systems like this, it's never the big mistake that brings pressure. It's the small one that doesn't look important at first. And then came the shift. Not in the streets, in attention. Patterns started connecting. Movements started getting noticed. Not because Frank changed anything, but because the system had become too consistent to ignore. What once made it efficient now made it visible. And once visibility reaches that level, pressure isn't far behind. At that point, the system was still running, but it wasn't invisible anymore. And that changes everything. Because once attention locks in, it doesn't need chaos to break a system. It just needs time. And time, combined with pressure, starts testing every part of what Frank Lucas built. The pressure didn't hit all at once, it built. Quiet surveillance, slow tracking, pieces coming together over time. That's how systems like this get taken down. Not through chaos, through patience. And once the attention was locked onto Frank Lucas, it wasn't about if the system would break it was about when. Then the pressure started landing inside the system. Arrests, interrogations, people being separated, forced to make decisions on their own. That's where structure gets tested, because the system can look strong on the outside, until every individual inside it is put under pressure alone. And that's when cracks start to form. And that's the part most systems don't survive: individual pressure. Loyalty sounds solid when everything is running, but when consequences become real, decisions change. People start calculating risk differently. What they were willing to protect before starts to feel heavier. And once that shift happens, the system isn't being tested anymore, it's unraveled. Frank held out at first. The system he built was designed to absorb pressure, not collapse from it. But pressure doesn't just attack structure, it isolates people, cuts them off, forces decisions without support. And when you're no longer protected by the system, you're left facing consequences alone. That's where the real shift happens. Not in the streets, in the mind. When the system can't shield you anymore, survival becomes personal. Frank Lucas had built everything around control, discipline, and loyalty. But under pressure, those ideas don't hold the same weight. Because when consequences become real, priorities change. And that's when the system turns on itself. Not by design, by decision. Cooperation doesn't start as betrayal. It starts as calculation. What can be traded? What can be reduced? What can be avoided? Frank understood the structure better than anyone, which also meant he understood exactly how to dismantle it piece by piece. Once that decision is made, everything changes. Names, roots, structure. What once protected the system now exposes it. Frank Lucas wasn't guessing, he knew exactly how it all fit together. And that's what made it effective. The same knowledge that built the system is what allowed it to be taken apart. And that's the part people don't talk about. Systems don't just fail, they get revealed. Piece by piece, detail by detail, until there's nothing left to protect. What once operated quietly is now fully understood. And once a system is understood like that, it doesn't come back the same way again. By the end, it wasn't about power anymore, it was about outcome. What could be kept, what could be reduced, what could be avoided. The system that once gave Frank control was no longer protecting him. And when that shift happens, the rules change. Not publicly, but in the decisions that follow. Frank Lucas built a system most people never could control, efficient and quiet. But systems like that don't fail because they don't work. They fail because pressure changes decisions. And when that happens, loyalty becomes conditional. If this makes sense to you, the full breakdown is linked in the description. Read it when you're ready.